Hello class. In our last unit we were talking about working with data files, and data files allow us to make our data persistent so that it stays there after a run. So we use files all the time. This presentation is a file, right? It's named CIS150 Chapter 13 Sequential Data Files.pptx. We can save data to files also. We can read data from files. Several of you may have seen way back in your past an INI type file that allowed you to customize some sort of execution. No matter what we're using a file for, gives us the capability to have that persistent data that hangs around, that we can access in between shutdowns of the machine and in between runs of our program. In C#, it's the system.io namespace that gives us the classes to allow us to access files as data. First of all, I want you to think a little bit about the difference between program files and data files. In our discussion, we were talking about compiled programs versus interpreted programs, and we saw there were some differences there. Same with program files. Program files are usually considered to be files that contain machine instructions, right? Like an executable file or something like that. It's still just a file though. It's just that it's not as readable to us humans as maybe a data file, a text file. Here's a data file where we have some different pieces of information. If you notice, our data file is in rows, and those rows are called records. That is the terminology that we use when we're working with a text data file. Now, in addition to each row, we have different columns of information, and each of those columns is considered a field. So if I'm looking at record 2, the field 1 field is equal to the value j.chavez. So it looks a lot like an Excel spreadsheet, but it's really somewhat different because in our program, we're probably going to read this file sequentially, a record at a time, and process each record as we go. So we're probably not going to read it in all at once and do something to all of it. Now, talking about how we access a file, I want you to think about some different terminologies and some different methodologies that have been available over the years. Sequential files, like I'm talking about with a text file, are usually processed in order, and you can think of those as being like a VCR tape. Do you remember a VHS tape where you have to fast forward sequentially to get to the position in the tape that you want to watch? That's a sequential access method. Versus direct access. And a good example of a direct access device is a DVD. Don't see many of those anymore either, right? But with a DVD, you can go to a specific spot on the DVD, seek a specific location, and that gives you random access. So you can randomly access any given point on the DVD. With C# and text files being stored on disk drives, disk media, we can access our files both sequentially and in a direct access mode. Usually with a user-written program, we'll use a sequential access unless we're accessing a database type file, and then we'll use direct access capabilities offered by that database. When we're working with a text file, though, we're going to go through a specific routine to work with the file. First, we're going to open the file. Then we're going to read a record, that first row out of the file. We're going to check to see if we hit the end. Maybe our file was empty. If we did not, we're going to process that record and read another one. Check to see if we were at the end. If not, process it, read another one. When we do finally get to the end of the file, we'll do some sort of end of file processing and close our file, and that will probably end our program. So when we have a data file, we can think of all of the records within that data file is being read into our process, and they're processed. You can see they're coming as output. And then finally, we'll get the end of file marker from our read, and we'll know that we have processed all of the records in that file. I want to look too at some Visual Studio solution folder options. Let's take a look at Visual Studio, or you go ahead and open yours. I'll keep my screen here on this PowerPoint so it doesn't get too distracting. But when you're looking at Visual Studio in Solution Explorer, up at the top you're seeing your solution folder. Underneath your solution folder, you may have one or many project folders. The project folders have this C# icon. Within the project folder, you'll find additional folders or groupings of information. First of all, you have a properties folder. It has some resource information and settings for your program that you can access as your C# knowledge advances. We have a references folder, and those are references that we make in our program through our using clauses and in other ways. So one thing that would be in that references category is our system namespace that we use in most of our projects. And then we have resources, which is where any images that we load into our project would go. If we're looking at a form project, we have our form1.cs or whatever it's been renamed. And under our form1.cs, we saw that we have our designer code and our resource information. And then we usually have a program.cs or main class.cs file. All of these things are important in our project because we need to know a little bit about what's going on and why it's important when we're working with TFS to check things in at this solution folder level. Otherwise, we'll be missing maybe some pieces. Now, when we're looking at Visual Studio and we want to see what files we have in our file system for this project, we can right-click on the solution and choose Open Folder in File Explorer, and that'll open our solution folder for us. And here I've got that solution folder open and I'm looking at it. So first of all, in this folder, I have a hidden file. This is named .vs, and usually a dot at the first position indicates a hidden file. Now this .vs file is information from TFS, so this project has been loaded to TFS. If I want to see this .vs file, like maybe I accidentally got my project associated with GitHub and I want to associate it with TFS, I could find the GitHub hidden file in my folder and delete it. That would delete the GitHub association. Deleting this .vs folder would delete the TFS association. Now, in order to see those files, you need to access your View tab. And on your View tab, you need to make sure that Hidden Items is checked, or you're not going to see this .vs file. You should also have file name extensions checked, because as a programmer, you need to be aware of exactly what a file's name is. You don't want things hidden from you. I can tell that my file name extensions are showing because I see the .sln on the solution file. It's always good programmer practice to have those things checked. Now within our solution folder, we'll have a folder for each project in the solution. This one just has one. So inside that folder, we'll see that we have several others. The bin, obj, properties, resources, our CS files, several different pieces of information. If you go into your bin folder and then the debug folder of the bin folder, you'll find the standalone executable for your project. So I could take this tax app.exe and run that however I wanted to in Windows, and it would be standalone at this point because it doesn't require any additional resources. So if you go to the bin debug folder, you'll find the executable for your project. Now, all these things matter to us a lot as we get started creating our first applications that access files, because we need to know where these data files reside, how we can open them, and how we can read them. So we'll be looking at that in our next video. Thank you.